Today's special guests in the Faith and Globalization Project are two clergymen from Northern Ireland who played significant roles in the process that brought peace to that province after almost 30 years of sectarian strife. They are the Reverend G. Harold Good, a Methodist minister who served as the president of the Methodist Church in Ireland in 2001-2002. He also directed the Corrymeela Center for Reconciliation for 5 years and served on the Human Rights Commission. He brought his religious commitments to the service of society in other capacities as well. For instance, as a member of the United Kingdom Social Security Advisory Committee from 1980 to 1998, and as chair of the Northern Ireland Commission for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders from 1992 to 2001. Our other special guest is Father Alec Reid, a Catholic priest of the Redemptorist Order from Tipperary, who was ordained in 1957. After pastoral service in various parts of Ireland, he moved to the Clonard Monastery in Belfast, where he would spend 40 years on the fault line between the nationalist Catholic community and the Protestants of Shankill Road. He became an icon of the Troubles in 1988, when he administered the last rites to two Royal Signals corporals killed by the Provisional IRA. In the 1980s and 90s, he facilitated contacts between the various political factions in Northern Ireland and between them and the Irish government in Dublin. More recently, he's been involved in peace efforts in the Basque region of Spain, where in 2002 he won the Sabino Arana Foundation Prize in recognition of his peacemaking efforts. Father Reid and Reverend Good worked together after the signing of the Good Friday Peace Accord in 1998. One important provision of that accord was that the IRA decommission their arms. In 2005, Reverend Good and Father Reid were the authorities who certified that the IRA had complied with that provision of the peace agreement. We're delighted to have you both here today.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin by exploring with Father Reid and Reverend Good the role that faith played in the Northern Ireland peace process. But let me begin with a background question, and I'll direct this to Reverend Good. What role did the clash of Protestant and Catholic faiths play in the perpetuation of the Troubles in Northern Ireland?
This is a difficult one to help people to understand, because around the world there is the impression that this is Catholics coming out of their church and Protestants coming out of theirs and getting embroiled in violence and battle with one another. I think one has to understand something of the history of our island and of our peoples. On the island of Ireland we have two peoples, a settler people who were the Scotch and the English and therefore Protestant, and we had the indigenous native Irish who would have been Roman Catholic in their tradition of faith. And so the conflict has been a clash of cultural identities within which religion plays a part, but this is much more to do with culture than creed, and much more to do with territory than theology. That is not to say that, as in situations similar to this around the world, religion does not play a part. Of course it does, because our religious identities and our cultural identities, they do intertwine and they overlap, so that all too easily we become chaplains to our own tribe, and therefore we consciously or unconsciously become part of the problem, and we become over-identified with the aspirations or the identities, which sadly, because I think to me this is a denial of our prophetic role, sadly we then become unfree and less able to be the kind of reconcilers and healers and builders of bridges that I believe we are called to be in our obedience to the gospel of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and that's helpful to keep in mind the complex situation in Ireland between the social and the religious. Father Reid, could I ask you to reflect a little bit on the process of peacemaking? What were some of the major episodes during the 80s and 90s that led members of the Catholic community first to embrace the road to peace?
Well, just before I ask that, just in relation to this question of Catholics and Protestants, see, for historical reasons, most of the Unionist community which is the community that wants the north of Ireland to remain united to the United Kingdom. That's why they're called Unionists. They were settlers and they were Protestants. The native Irish, who want Ireland to be united and separated from the United Kingdom, they were Roman Catholics. So the clash is really between Unionists, people who want Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, and nationalists who want Northern Ireland to become part of United Ireland. That's the clash. But it just happens that for historical reasons, as I said, the Unionists are nearly all Protestants, and the nationalists are nearly all Catholics. And then people get the impression that Catholics and Protestants has nothing to do with Catholicism and Protestantism. It's a purely political clash over whether the north of Ireland should be part of the United Kingdom or whether it should be part of, that is where it is. It just happens that the nationalists are mostly Catholic and the Unionists are mostly Protestants, and people get this impression there's Catholics and Protestants, and nothing to do with Catholicism and Protestantism.
Granting that the major problem is a political one, religious leaders played a significant role in helping to resolve it, right? And
yes.
Could you think with us about that and how, on the Catholic side, there were efforts in that direction?
Well, you see, from the point of view of the Catholic Church, its approach was to try to end the suffering that the conflict was causing, to stop people being killed or injured or suffering heartbreak. And so the churches, and that was its focus. We want to stop people being killed and injured. Therefore, it said, on our own side, the national side, we have the IRA who are causing death and injury. So the primary objective of the church's approach was to persuade the IRA to stop their armed campaign, and in that way to stop people being killed and injured, at least as far as the IRA were concerned. So that was the way we if you like, that's what we wanted, why we wanted to stop the IRA. And in relation to doing that, we went to the leader, the political leader of the IRA, if you like, or Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, very, very gifted politician. And he said, if you want to stop the IRA, there's only one way, and that is to get a strategy for settling the conflict in a democratic way, which will represent a consensus between the three main parties and nationalist parties, namely Sinn Féin, the SDLP, the other big nationalist party, peaceful party, and the Irish government. So this is what he said, there's only one way. If you have a strategy to settle the conflict that is a consensus strategy between the three main nationalist parties, the IRA will stop for that. So then we had to set about setting up a strategy that was common to the three parties, SDLP, Sinn Féin, and the Irish government. And John Hume, the leader of the SDLP, he said, what we'll do is we'll persuade the two governments, the Irish government and the British government, to make a common statement in which the British government will recognise the right of the Irish people to self-determination. And then the understanding was that if the British and Irish governments made that statement, the IRA would stop. So that was kind of the way we went about it. And it took us some time to get the wording of a statement that the two governments would make and for which the IRA would stop. It took us about 9 months, but eventually we did. And this John Major was the British Prime Minister. Bertie Ahern was the Irish Prime Minister. And we ended up then with a statement to which the IRA agreed that if this statement was made by the two governments, they would stop. But in the event, John Major, who was depending on the Unionists in the Westminster Parliament to stay in power at the time, he was a minority government, he had to change really the wording that we brought to him and for which the IRA were going to stop. Well, the result was when the two governments made the statement in December 1993, it's known as the Downing Street Statement, the IRA didn't stop immediately because it wasn't the wording to which they had agreed. But I know from my contacts that within say that the statement was made in December, by March at latest the IRA has decided to stop in response to that statement.
Mm-hmm. Could we pause there? And it's interesting how religious leaders are playing a significant role in pushing political negotiations along and facilitating them. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I mean, as I say, our primary objective was to stop people being killed and injured from our side of the conflict, and that meant stopping the IRA. So our primary focus was, how do we stop the IRA?
I'd be interested to hear Reverend Good talk a little bit about attitudes on the other side, the Unionist side, and what the Protestant leadership was doing.
Yeah, I think one thing that should be said is that there are four, what we call the four main churches in Ireland. They would be the Roman Catholic, the Anglican, you call Episcopal, Presbyterian and Methodist. And the leadership of those four churches have come together and work quite closely together and will do many things together. And I think this is very important, that they're seen to be together in a divided society, that there are these visible, symbolic expressions of being united in what really matters. And I think that the church has two roles to play. We are not politicians. We're not a political party. We're not even an alternative to a political party. We have two roles. One is pastoral and one is prophetic. And Father Alec has spoken about the pastoral side. We all shared that deep concern to stop the killing, to try and put grief to be a thing of the past. So much pain and heartache on both sides, all sides. That is a pastoral concern, and to bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted, that was a very important part of our role. And if you do not help people to deal with their grief and their hurt and their pain and their anger, then it's going to come out and be expressed in yet more violence. And so that was a very important role for all of us, the pastoral role. But there's also the prophetic role, and that is to challenge the institutions of state, is to challenge the political parties. It is to be constantly and aggressively questioning. It is to be aggressive in the face of injustice, and anything which marginalizes people or reduces the dignity of the human person, all of those. And at the end of the day, what we should have been asking, and I don't think we did this as well as we should, but we're learning. And the question that churches should have been asking, and must now ask, is not whether or not we should be in a united kingdom or a united Ireland. I don't think that that is the primary question for us within the leadership of the churches. The question is, what kind of society do we want? What are the values upon which we base our society, whether it be in a united this or a united that or whatever? What kind of society, what are the values that reflect not the kingdoms of this earth, but the kingdom of God on earth? And that, I think, is a very fundamental role for us in the churches.
They never try to, you see, what you have to do with people who are involved in, if you like, armed struggle, as they would say, is to engage them. You have to talk to them, meet them, and if you do, you'll do business with them, and they'll do business with you. But standing at a distance and shouting at them is not the way. It's not the way to deal with armed people.
I think just on that, institutions, by their very nature, are unwieldy things. It's difficult to get an institution. It's like trying to move an army, you know. And there are times when the best business is done by the foot soldiers, by individuals rather than the institutions. And I think that's all right as long as those individuals have the support and the blessing of the institution to act in their name. And I think that some of the most important work in peacemaking in our context has been people like Alec Reid and others of us who have, behind the scenes, not making headlines at the time, just working quietly, creating space for people to meet, people who otherwise would not have met, to create opportunity for people from different sides to engage in honest dialogue. where they could be open with each other. And I think that was a very important role for individuals from within the communities of faith on both sides. Institutions find it difficult to do that because they have to bring their constituencies with them. But we could go into the quiet places, a bit like people who set the stage when the curtain is pulled. You know, who cares who adjusted the lights and moved the furniture? What it matters, and that was a very important role for some of us who felt under the compulsion of the gospel to create that kind of objective space.
Say a little bit more about that process of building bridges and creating spaces for intercommunal and interfaith dialogue. What kinds of strategies did you adopt to make that happen? Father Reid?
Well, I'll tell you, our approach to the conflict, as I say, was to stop the IRA. Now, the IRA were fighting what they would call the British presence, you know. They said the United Kingdom had no right to be in Ireland, and their soldiers had no right to be walking our streets. So their whole objective was to put the Brits out, as they would say, put the English out. That's why that was the IRA's campaign. And we, as I say, tried to persuade. We did persuade them to take a peaceful approach to putting them out, because all the nationalist parties agreed that they should get out, you know. And it's a question of persuading the IRA to take a peaceful approach. Now, as far as the unionist people were concerned, we didn't worry too much about the unionists, because our worry was to stop the IRA killing people, you know. And that had to do with the British and the Irish themselves coming together to get a peaceful way of putting them out. As I say, we worked fairly little, very, very little, in terms of trying to bring about reconciliation between the two communities, because our big job was to stop the IRA, as I say. And then you see what happened then was, when the IRA stopped, then the loyalists stopped. They issued a statement very quickly saying, we're stopping, you know? So that the violence from both sides stopped. When the IRA stopped, the loyalists stopped. And that was a big, I mean, it was absolutely fundamental to the peace process that the IRA stopped. I never appreciated how much a ceasefire would mean. But once the IRA stopped, then the whole situation opened up. People could start meeting and negotiating, and Sinn Féin, the Republican Party, the IRA Party, if you like, they were invited into normal political discussion. And the whole thing really started to move when the IRA stopped, because then contacts were open between, including, you see, you had to bring in the Republicans. That was Sinn Féin. If you were going to be realistic about having a real dialogue. And Sinn Féin were acceptable to the other political parties once the IRA stopped. I don't know if that...
No, I think that's very important. So a key first step in moving a peace process forward was to get some internal cohesion and harmony within one of the communities, rather than building a bridge to the other.
Yeah, that was, we used to say, peace in Ireland means peace among the Irish. Once the Irish made peace among themselves, that was it. War was over then. Because then you could start, you know, whatever other problems the nationalists would go as one body to negotiate. But the big thing was to stop the Irish fighting among themselves. And once you did that, then that was it. The road was open then for whatever, to the Good Friday Agreement and whatever else you wanted to negotiate, you know.
What was some of the strongest resistance you had to moving in that direction of peace on either side?
Harold, you answer that.
Well, I think in all sorts of situations of conflict, there's always resistance on the part of people to talk with their enemy. That's seen to be capitulation. That's seen to be compromise. That's seen to be surrender if you talk to your enemy. And this isn't just peculiar to Ireland. We can lift that to a global debate. And I think it's something that this country is now beginning to address and think about. And, you know, some of the debate around coming up to the election on that issue. And we had to learn that whatever our people were frightened at the idea. I mean, I, as a Protestant minister, there were people in my community, particularly those who had suffered, lost loved ones, who, when they knew that some of us were talking with the perceived enemy, felt we are about to surrender something. And yet, was it Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, who said when he did exactly this, when he was photographed shaking hands with Yasser Arafat, the whole roof fell in on him. And he said, you don't make peace by talking with your friends. You must talk with your enemy. And that was, I think, a role for some of us within the communities of faith, the religious life of the community, to say that the one we serve told us what we had to have a different attitude towards our perceived enemies than the old way. And that was a very important breakthrough for people to talk. And then to lift that from behind the scenes, as it were, to a more public profile, where governments had to talk with each other and to talk with the leadership of the paramilitary organizations and the IRA and begin to engage. And that brought us all forward, because our history has been based on exclusion, excluding people. And that is a recipe for nothing but grief, to exclude people. And so we had to find ways of bringing each other in, not bringing you in and bringing you in, but bringing each other in. And that was a big breakthrough. And that led to the Good Friday Agreement, which was a remarkable breakthrough, chaired by Senator George Mitchell, who did a wonderful job in our community, because we had to move beyond exclusion.
Mm-hmm. Could I ask you both in conclusion to reflect just a little bit on the resources you brought to the task to get people to think about embrace rather than exclusion? Father Reid?
Resources.
Mm-hmm. Spiritual resources.
Well, the spiritual resources, we have what I call the golden rule of peacemaking, is that you do what you reasonably can and then you leave it to the Lord. And you do what you reasonably can, you don't have to lose any sleep over it or put a strain on your health. You do what you reasonably can to sort out the problem, then you leave it to the Lord. And the Lord then comes along behind and he sorts out the bits and pieces that you weren't able to sort out. But you do what you reasonably can, and as long as you're doing what you reasonably can, you can be certain that the Lord will pack you up and sort out what needs to be sorted out. So that was, if you like, therefore you didn't worry or you weren't anxious, because you knew that if you did what you reasonably could, you could rely on the Lord to bring the thing to a good conclusion. And that worked. That's the experience we had. So if you like, that's where your faith, if you like, gave you courage and gave you peace of mind, if you like. Once you knew you were doing what you reasonably can, weren't lying awake at night or anything, were doing what you reasonably could, then you were certain the Lord will back you up and bring the whole thing to a good conclusion. And that's the way it works. So there's where your faith, if you like, gave you the courage and gave you the kind of sense that you didn't have to worry. Just do what you can, reasonably can. So that's where your faith, is a great source of strength,
Related to that, there are two spiritual factors that come to my mind, resources. One is hope. The whole biblical narrative is one of hope, looking forward. And in the face of those who say it can never be any way different from this, it'll always be like this, we had to nurture hope. And I remember going to a World Council of Churches conference in Bangkok way back in 1973, I think it was. And most of it went over my head, but there was one phrase that I brought home with me which was well worth going to Bangkok to hear, and it was the theologian Jürgen Moltmann in his presentation who said, "Always remember that Christ takes the inevitability out of history." And I hung on to that phrase throughout all those dark years when people said there's no solution, it'll never be any different. I always remembered Christ takes the inevitability out of history. That's hope. And the second thing is, and I say it as somebody coming from the evangelical tradition, the possibility for change in the human heart and mind. That we are all capable of being transformed and changed. And when we see people who we feel are diametrically opposed to the peace that we want, we have to remember that they too are children of this God who has redeemed us all through Christ. And there is, for all of us, this opportunity for change. And we're seeing it. We are actually seeing it. We are seeing people who said no and never, who are now working together in partnership. And change of heart, change of heart. That's the key to all of our conflicts in the world. Change of mind is important, but change of heart is fundamental.
Well, thank you both, and I think we can conclude on that very hopeful note. The emphasis on the importance of faith and leaving some things in the hand of the Lord as an inspiration to continue to work. The notion that hope is going to be a guiding principle of engaging in very difficult situations. And I congratulate both of you on the marvelous work you've done for peace in Northern Ireland. And thank you for being with us for this time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Harry.
much.
Thank you.
God bless you.